Thanks for tuning in today to TV2's Front Porch Conversations. And here once again, we are on the front porch at the Copeland Medical Center. And I just want to remind you that when you're on the river, the front porch is the side towards the river. Doris, thank you for coming. And
thank you for inviting me.
And this is Doris McClain, who lives in Riverwoods with her husband, Jack.
Correct.
And you and Jack spent some time living on the river too, right? Not
yes.
This river.
We lived in Fleming Island or Jacksonville, we're called both. And we lived on the lake, Doctor's Lake, for 20 years. And we bought an old fish camp, which was nothing but a block that was planned for a fish camp, never developed. And it had the fishing tanks and the deck that went like 169 feet out. Now, I came along, Jack said, let's go and look at that house and see what you think we can do with it. So here we could get in the boat, drive over there. There's a single guy living there. We wake him up, and I said, I want to see this house. I'm going to buy it. He said, no, I don't think so. I'm working a deal. So I sat on a napkin, or I didn't sit on a napkin, excuse me. I took a napkin and I drew the plan, which went upstairs and was surrounded three sides by water. And we did purchase the house, and it was like a barn raising. Our friends helped us. We had cookouts on weekends before we moved down there. And it was a wonderful experience, especially for my son.
Well, thank you for sharing that, but we'll get back to that. Now, why don't we tell people where you started? Where were you born and where did you grow up?
Well, I think I was told by my birth certificate that I was born in Silva, North Carolina, on top of the mountain, and which is part of Jackson County, and Jackson County connects with Cherokee. So I got the cultural end of the minority or whatever, and which was wonderful. But it was hard times. I was born in 1941, August the 7th, on my mom's birthday, and she was delighted. And my dad, he didn't work. There was no jobs there. We were starving. So after the third child, the TVA got started, and Union Carbide got started. And so we had to have food. We had no plumbing and no electricity. So he got a job, at first with TVA, and then went to Union Carbide, and we moved to Knoxville, Tennessee. We did not have a car. We did not have inside plumbing. But the TVA, that's what it was all about. Roosevelt, the new job deal, it was called something else, can't remember. But he came in and he created dams, which furnished us water, electricity, and all. We have a refrigerator. We used a spring as a refrigerator. But it was, as I look back, it's probably the best thing that ever happened, that I be born without electricity, because many times we take these things for granted.
Absolutely.
So he got a job at Union Carbide, and then he built a house. We had enough money for him to build it. He was a carpenter, and a good carpenter. He had a 4th grade education, but the smartest man on this earth. He was self-taught. And so he built a 3-story house, and we were so excited. We had electricity. We didn't have to go outside to the bathroom. We could take a shower. We could take a bath. It was amazing. And then at Christmas time, and my mom never shared it with any of us girls, she brought home a baby. She was going through the change. That was my little brother. He was 10 years younger than me, and I adored it. I adored him. My sister was 10 years older than me, and I thought she was the most beautiful person in the whole wide world. But underneath all that, there was a lot of tragedy. I lost my sister. She married her doctor. They got a divorce. She ended up homeless. He was Jewish. He was from New York. And so they ended up getting a divorce. She went to New York, obviously in her mind. She thought she was going to find him and they could get back together. Well, she ended up homeless. Every time I look, and I work downtown, every time I see someone homeless, I wonder what has happened to their life. Mm-hmm. You know, sometimes you can tell that they were probably in the military, in a teaching job. You know that they've been somewhere and they're broken. Mm-hmm. That's the way I felt. And we're talking about many years ago. My dad had to go get her, and he's never been out of Knoxville. So they went and brought her home, put her in the hospital. She stayed there for 2 years. They did the
shock treatments.
The shock treatments, thank you. And they did 2 on her. She was a vegetable after that. Mom and Dad brought her home, and she was just a vegetable. But she was so smart. She got her degree from Blue Mountain College. She got her master's degree. Was working on her doctor's degree. And she was beautiful. She won Cherry Blossom in Washington, D.C. She also worked with Hubert Humphrey at the time he was there, because she worked for the FBI. And then she came back, got her degree, and she taught the first grade. She ran for mayor, didn't get it, but she thought a woman could do anything a man can do.
And did some of that rub off on you?
Oh, what do you know? It did. Some of it did rub off on me. Because there was a lot of good quality. You know, she had a lot of good goals. But when she got so sick, my mom was picking apples, and she heard a thump on the side of the house. She thought an apple had dropped. She had, you know, the way the orchard was, you couldn't tell. When she went in, she found my sister dead. She had committed suicide. And my brother went through the hippie years, drugs everywhere. This was after Jack and I got married. Well, both times was after Jack and I got married. He got into the drugs. So his girlfriend broke up with him. He was in his 20s. His girlfriend broke up with him. My mom and dad was in Silva, across the mountain. And he called him on the phone to say goodbye. And he shot himself. That was 2 siblings that committed suicide. My mom and dad was never, ever the same. Sure. But I guess the point I'm making is we didn't have insurance. People just do not realize until you're faced with years in a hospital, emotional problems, how important our insurance is, our affordable insurance. Mm-hmm. I can tell you firsthand. So the story goes on to meeting Jack. Is that the next thing you want?
Well, you went to school in Knoxville, is that right?
I went to UT. I did not graduate. I stopped to go to work for a pharmacy, which was a friend of mine, to make extra money so I could go back to school. I got 3 years in. I majored in elementary education. I did my practice teaching, and then finally decided I'd take a break for a while. And this is where I met Jack.
And Jack is now your husband.
Jack is now my husband. We'll celebrate our 56th anniversary in a week, the 16th of May. We had a very rocky start, but we got it all cleared up, and the next year was 64. We got married in 64. Do you want me to tell everybody about my first date?
Yes.
My first date was like crazy.
With Jack, right? Your
With
first date.
Jack. He said, Doris, his father, he had it made. His father had a marina. They had boats. They had jukeboxes. We danced there. It was just a wonderful place for a teenager. So he said, Doris, I'm going to take you out in the boat. I'd never been. Well, maybe I had. Maybe I began the boating later. But we went out. He said, but we got to go after the sun goes down when it starts getting dark. I thought, oh, my Lord, what am I getting myself into? The only thing that made me comfortable was he was taking his nephew with him. And he was 12 years old. So I said, this can't be too bad. So we went to a cove, and he had frog gigs. He said, Doris, we're going to go frog gigging. And I kind of like, I'm going to take these home to your dad, and he's got to like me. But the way I looked at it was, if I don't participate in frog gigging, or if I do, then I'll get this guy. If I do not, then I will not get this guy. So we started gigging for frogs, and I got the hiccups. The louder my hiccups got, have you ever just could not
Yes.
stop them? The louder my hiccups got, the louder the frogs got. But we just kept right on going, and Tommy, who's my nephew, he got in the back of the boat and was throwing up so bad that we were laughing. And so we got a whole bucket full, and then we took it back to my dad, and Jack cooked them because he wanted me to see how they hopped in the pan. Because they're still alive. So at my house, Jack started cooking the frog legs, and I was introduced to a whole different world: fish, frog legs, all this stuff. And they were wonderful. And needless to say, my dad was impressed. Because Dad was sort of an outdoors person. You know, he liked to hunt and do a lot of things like that. And they lived on the land, you know. So he was really impressed that Jack knew how to gig for frogs. And I had to impress Jack by gigging for him.
So have you done much frog gigging since?
No. Never again. Now, a lot of boating. A lot of boating.
And you were still living in Tennessee then?
Yes.
And I know you later moved to Jacksonville, to that
Yes.
area. When was that?
We moved to Jacksonville. Okay. Jack moved to Jacksonville 3 months after we got married in May. April. 2 months after we got married, of 64. He came back. I said, go to Jacksonville, get you a job. I was working. I kept my job. I said, I'll keep my job until you can get a job in Jacksonville. Because we were having a lot of issues by staying in Knoxville. And they weren't going to get any better. So we decided, I did go to the doctor there. Because Jack and I got married, and you know it's routine that we go to the doctor. Well, she called my mom. We didn't have telephones then. I didn't have a telephone. You don't have cell phones. And they went and got my mom at church and told everybody I had cancer. Well, I just assumed, she said, you can forget having children because you've got cancer. And it was left like that. So then when I got to Florida, I immediately got a doctor. And he did all the tests. He said, you're fine. Well, in the meantime, I got pregnant the following year. And I was fine. And there has never been an issue from that point forward about me having cancer. But Jack was devastated. He just thought, when we heard the word cancer,
Right.
we thought, that's just it. So anyway, we got to Jacksonville. Jack got a job. He came back, got me. And we lived in Springfield, which is the worst part of town you can live in. But we both worked downtown, and we didn't have a car. But it was beautiful to me. I mean, it is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's got all the old houses, and the water is right there. And we walked from Springfield to downtown Jacksonville every single day, every single night. And we had different times, so we couldn't walk together. And then we moved into a house on the west side. We lived on the west side of Jacksonville. And from there, we ended up in Orange Park.
Well, during all those years, I know you had a number of different jobs.
Yeah.
But one you've talked about to me that I think is fascinating and our viewers will like to know, you were on the ground floor of doing something.
I was on the ground floor.
Well,
up there.
tell us where you worked first.
Huh?
Where were you working?
Well, first of all, I had to apply for it because we had no insurance. Jack lost his job. And I had lots of jobs, but they did not cover insurance. And we had a son, and he had cystic fibrosis also, which meant that was a pre-existing illness. So Bell South was the only company that would pick up anybody with a pre-existing illness. So I told Jack, I said, I'm going downtown, and I'm going to try to get this job. So the line was horrible. It wasn't like it is now, you go on a computer. But some way I got the job, and it was on the ground floor of implementing 911 for the host, well, all over really. We were just responsible for the state of Florida. The counties went in and started numbering all these country roads, and we started getting all this negative feedback. Because they did not want house numbers, and they wanted their communities to be called certain things because one community was more prestigious, and we went by zip codes. Whatever. For example, Dowling Park, they probably would have fought. I don't know how Dowling Park ended up being, but it does have its own zip code. If you had your own zip code, you could end up with what you wanted for the name of the city, okay? But we, at first, started drawing all the streets on what we called mylars, which is a plastic, huge, it wasn't paper, it was plastic, and we had a special ink, and we drew out all the new street names and the street numbers. And they said, this is going to be used for a program, and everybody's going to be able to see where you live at. I said, this is crazy. I said, how in the world can everybody, when the telephone rings, see where they're calling from? Or like you call in for emergency, and you're going to get, I could sort of get that on 911 emergency, but it was much bigger than that. It went to ordering pizzas, it went to all the online things because they could see exactly the name and where you come from. And
I'm sure it's had GPS has had a big impact with that same numbering system.
yeah, everybody had an impact, and it was huge. So I did that for 10 years. We finally got it on board, and I continued to work with the company, but what AT&T does, or it was Bell South, they take complete departments. That was an outsourced type department. Some of the people were outsourced, and they moved the complete department to Timbuktu. Well, that's what they did with their department. And then it shut down. So I was like, I have to get another job. So then that was when I went into engineering. And every time I change jobs, you have to do a testing process. and you'd be a nervous wreck because you had to do it just like the entries.
Right.
I had to go back to school to pass the test. I had to take a course in electronics and electricity because there was no way I could go to engineering without passing certain tests. So I just had to go back to school, and I did.
Doris, why don't you share a little bit about your son Chris and tell him the roles that Jack played all these years in his life.
My husband is the very best husband in the whole wide world. And his son said, loved him to death. Jack took, Chris had cystic fibrosis. Mm-hmm. So we decided, Jack and I, that we would treat him as normal as we possibly could. And I had to learn, and Jack had to learn, both of us, how to be a doctor. I've had people ask me, well, have you been a doctor or a nurse? And I said, no, this is by personal experience. We had to take care of the portacath, which is the object that you put in so you can do IVs without your blood, everything breaking down, your veins. I'll get it. And he took 80 pills a day. He slept in the mist tent. We had to do what we call clamping. Jack and I both had to do it, and that's clamping on the back because this is a respiratory problem. But we tried not to treat him. We tried to just treat him normal. That was fine until the last 2 years, but many of his friends had no idea he had cystic fibrosis. We did every so much at the house. His dad taught him fishing. He taught him how to drive the boat. He taught him how to race. He was in the hospital when he was 16, and he had to have his driver's license. So Jack he said, okay, son, I'll go to the hospital. We'll go down. So he goes, checks him out of the hospital, which with Chris, you didn't have to check him out. He just, he was so used to it, he had all the nurses wrapped around his little finger. So he went and got his driver's license, and Jack took him back to the hospital and left the car with him. And the kid at 16 drove home from downtown Jacksonville to Fleming Island. And they had part of the highway, but part of the interstate blocked, and he found the roundabout through Mandarin. And I said, Chris, I was scared to death. He says, Mom, I know my way around, but it was we always had an umbrella over us that we would lose our insurance. And it's a horrible feeling unless you've been there. And Chris, he died at 18. His dad quit his job, and Chris wanted him to take care of him. And in between the times, there might be 2 hours a day that he felt like going fishing. Well, Jack was there to take him fishing. He also had fish tanks that we kept with the house. And he put shiners in the fish tanks and sold them to the fishermen because Jack was president of the North Florida Bass Club, and Chris was getting $12 a dozen, and the kid would make like $100 a week. He never asked us for money. And it also served, do you know how you get bait? You swing that net? Yeah. And that was physical therapy for him, because it would get his lungs stronger, and it let us cut back on physical therapy. But he loved the water, and he loved his daddy, and I could not have asked for a better father for my son. And I guess if I would say what was my goal when I started off, I had no idea what the road ahead was going to be. Mm-hmm. But you know what? You kindly accept what God puts on your plate and make the best of it. And Jack, he honestly did. He did. But see, I had to continue working, And that was hard too, because if we just had phones where you could text each other, that would have helped.
Right.
Have I left something out?
Yeah. Would you tell us about, you talked to me about when you first became when you came to faith. Where did you start your
Okay. Faith.
faith?
We lived in a little house with no transportation. And in order to get to a church, you just had to go to the nearest church. There wasn't such a thing as you having a choice.
And this was when you were growing up, right?
This was when I was like 4, 5, yes. And we started walking. Mom and all of us started walking. And we attended the Mennonite church. I'm going to tell you, I have never met such nice people. There was never pressure. There was always laughter. They always had a positive attitude. There was no pointing fingers at each other. Now I never got into all the ins and outs because I was too young, but they certainly made us kids happy. They baked cakes, and my mom baked cakes, but she could not compare to them. And they were so good to us. And for me as a kid, it put a foundation for what I strive for coming out of a Mennonite church. And I struggled with what I strive for a long time. I was involved with a Baptist church, which did not work for me. But the treasure when I moved down here, I finally found my church, St. Luke's Episcopal, and I go to church together.
And we're certainly glad you found us as well at our church.
Yeah, I couldn't click. I mean, I just couldn't click as far as, I always went to church, attended church, but I was never comfortable. So that is the one thing that's wonderful about moving here, was I found my friends, and most of us live on the same street, a lot of us, and that's meant a lot to me. And to just see how wonderful so many women, to get 30 women together in a meeting's a big deal for me,
And it was fun yesterday trying to do it by conference call.
Yes, it was. And the fellowship and the love. I think that's basically what God expects out of us. He wants us to love. He wants us to share. He does not want us to be prejudiced against anybody, especially minorities. I don't care how God created you. Whether you're gay or what, you're still to love that person. And my goal is always not to be so critical, and we're living in a horrible time, but not to be so critical. Do not be a bully. Do not upset everybody, with your mouth. And I basically have had to turn the TV off because it's gotten so ugly to me, because that's not how I was raised. I was raised that we all love each other.
And I think that's a wonderful place to end our conversation today. And Doris, I love you, and I'm glad that you were here with us today. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and come back and see us at another Front Porch Conversation. Thanks so much.